And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just off just a couple of announcements. We do have a few more meetings set up past this meeting date, September 23rd, October 7th, October 21st, and November the 4th. I'm just reminding you of those for your calendar purposes. I will send all of this to you beyond this meeting so that you have it as part of your notes moving forward. But those are the remaining dates for our group beyond tonight. Dr. Kendi is a well-established academician. He's very well respected. He recently became the director of the Center for Anti-Racist Research at Boston University, and his book is making national waves. I want to introduce our speaker tonight. He's someone that I've invited to sort of wet the palate for us when it comes to the introduction, as well as the chapters leading all the way up to chapter 4. He's someone that I've known, I won't say how many years because he's gonna be upset with me if I say, but I've known him for a number of years. And he's someone that I met while I was making my way through the academic circles over in New England at Brown University. And he and I have been very good friends since. His family are not just people that I'm acquainted with, but they are in my heart. They are my family, and they are people that I've learned so very much from. I will not spend the next hour introducing him because I promised him I would not. So I'll just say a few things just to give you a sense of who he is. He is the Reverend Jonathan Young-Scaggs, and he is an ordained clergyman who has served in various roles as a pastor for over 20 years. And he served in many congregations, particularly in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, as well as in the Southwest. He's currently providing pulpit supply for the Presbyterian Church in the state of Arizona. I am so grateful to know him as a friend and a colleague, as someone who shared his experience and his life with me for so long. I want to believe that because of him, I'm the pastor of an amazing church in South Orange County. Men like him have showed me how to do this and what it means to do this, and I wouldn't be here without him. So, Reverend Jonathan, I've asked you to come to say hello to the people, and then if you would, give us your thoughts on the introduction through chapter 4 of the book.
Yeah, hello. Hello, everybody.
Hi.
I'm hoping the audio is okay. I did experience a little in and out. Perhaps it's because I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, and I have Cox internet service, which is notorious for being faulty. Days is great, most days it's okay, and some days it's god awful terrible. We just pray. So far today, we hope that the prayers of the righteous availeth much. We do, in fact, appreciate the invitation extended by your pastor and my friend, Reverend Rod, we used to call him, when he was on the, y'all didn't know this, do you? When he was on the radio in Providence, Rhode Island on Sunday morning. I don't remember the station off the top of my head, but Reverend Rod would come on about 6 o'clock in the morning and start praying and semi-preaching, playing music. And was a tremendous spiritual lift for those of us who are rising early on Sunday morning, perhaps to put the last pin on a sermon, or maybe just to be up praying prior to worship service. And he would encourage our souls along those dusty, crusty roads. And he became quite the celebrity, if you will, there in Providence. And he's shaking his head, talking about stop it, stop it, stop it. And he knows it's all true. I do appreciate the phone call from Reverend Rod to say, hey, can you please? And my response is almost always, well, let me see what I can do, which means yes. And I just pray that the Spirit of God is with me. I love the introductions going around the room. Y'all are some fabulous people. And I just pray God's encouragement upon your lives going forward. for all you do. Okay. Hello, Flagstaff. And, you know, our weather just changed last night, and I suspect yours did as well. We are finally out of the 110s and down into the high 90s. So we are just excited about it. We hope that there's nobody there who is troubled by the fires that we see reported coming from California. I don't think that you directly are, but perhaps you know someone who is. And I would encourage you to lift them in prayer and give them a call or a text to confirm that they're okay, because in these times, facing tragedies like a fire out of the middle of nowhere, your feelings may be one way or another about nature taking back what is nature's, or about the loss of property and life. These things are concerning for us all. And it's up to God to balance them appropriately for us. We can only pray that God's people will be saved from any sorts of wretchedness. Hi there from Boston. Okay, yes, so University, did my master's work there, and lived in Boston, lived in Providence, worked in Boston, worked in Providence. And so it's good to have folks from New England on the call. What a pleasant surprise. I lived in Atlanta for a few years, and so I know something about the old South. My brother-in-law still lives there. Visited him over the summer. I'm not ashamed to say I'll never live south of the Mason-Dixon again. So take that for what it is. You know, we all have different experiences. That doesn't make us bad people. It doesn't make anybody else worse than we are. It just means that we have a set of experiences that dictate what the potential of our futures is going to lead us to. And I love the question, you know, how old will I be when I turn Black? Very thought-provoking and halting in many ways, just as I think Kendi's book is thought-provoking and haunting at the same time in some of the same ways. Hey, Phil is off the highway. That's a good thing. Looks like he's walking into the house. It's dark, and still got the cell phone running. That's a wonderful thing. Okay, good. So, how to be an anti-racist. I think the title is intended to shock people. I think the title is intended to raise a hair on the back of our neck. I think the author's desire to begin with, to get you to pick up the book in the first place, you know, to want to read the thing, to consider reading the thing. I think that given there are thousands of books on shelves from authors, that there has to be something that grabs you. And if it doesn't grab you, you're not going to touch the book and buy it. And why write a book if nobody's going to buy it? And so I think in part that was his duty and his task to create. I mean, every good English teacher, I don't know if there are any English teachers in the house, but every good English teacher will tell you that if you don't grab your reader right at the beginning, then I froze. If you don't grab your reader at the very beginning, I hope the audio is okay. If you don't grab your reader at the very beginning, you're gonna have okay, I'm back. Hey. Okay, any English teacher will tell you, if you don't grab your reader at the very beginning, then you may not get a second chance, right? And so Kendi does just that. With the title of his work, How to Be an Anti-Racist. There's no way you can't find that there's some shock value there, and shock value is good. Okay, so I want to highlight a couple of books to give you some background on where I'm coming from. The first is a book that was written some time ago, 1974, by a woman named Carol Stark. And Rod, this thing is just...
Can you hear me, Reverend John? Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, I couldn't understand. I understand I was cutting in and out. I'm sorry, folks. There's nothing I can do about that. But I just wanted to highlight 3 books. One book is called All Our Kin. All Our Kin is by Carol Stark. It's a 1974 classic. It's a sociological study. Another one that by Carol Stark. Nadia Bolz-Weber wrote a book. It's called, man, I am just off. I'm going to send these to Roger. It's called, all right, let's see what happens here. Let's see what happens here.
Reverend John, I'm gonna send you the dial-in information.
Maybe that'll help.
Because we're having difficulty making out what you're saying. So just give me a moment.
Yeah, I am getting that on this end as well. Send it to me. I will call in right away. Okay.
Okay. Feel free to keep speaking.
Maybe we'll still keep the video up.
Keep going. Keep going.
Yeah. Okay. So the other book was Accidental Saints. Accidental Saints, which is by Nadia Bolz-Weber. Finding God in All the Wrong People is the subtitle. And everybody's read The Shack, right? Everybody's read The Shack. I'm almost sure of it, by Paul Young. Okay, so 3 books that inform some of my background as I approach this work here. Rod, you gonna text that to me? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. But so today, Kendi. Today, Kendi, if I can make some sense of Kendi in the midst of my subpar internet service, then I'll give it a try, okay? Other than the shock value, Kendi in his first 4 chapters seems to begin to paint a picture of his background. And I like that everybody gets sort of a backstory to who they are, where they came from, what their experiences are. And Kendi does the same kind of thing. He talks about where he was raised, and come on, Rod.
It's coming. It's coming.
Was raised and how he was raised. He gives us a little background into the kind of community that he was nurtured within and what that community expected of him and what his family kind of wanted to see him. He doesn't say a lot about what his family expected of him, but he does talk about the limitations the community was prepared to accept from him. That's 2 different things. And both of those are very important for us to try to understand, right? So his home life, hey, they wanted him to go to college. They wanted him to graduate from high school, but they were church folk, good church folk, go to church on Sunday, dress up properly, do the right things. There's a culture of, I keep looking at my phone, hoping Rod will have this information to me.
It's coming. I have to send you the passcode, so bear with me.
Okay. There's a culture of acceptability that Kendi was raised within. He has this strange name too that kind of doesn't allow for passage within his given community because his last name is not a let's just say a traditional last name. It's not a Smith, it's not a Williams, it's not a Young. It's kind of a different last name, Kendi. Nonetheless, his parents do expect him to do well in school, and he doesn't. And they accept that he doesn't do well in school for whatever reasons they do, but he's a good athlete. He's a good athlete, so he'll sooner or later maybe he'll find a path. And part of me just cringed as I read that, came to understand that part, because too many African American boys and girls are sent down the path of athletic prowess, seeking the promised land, seeking a place where things would be better because you can make a lot of money. I haven't ever made a lot of money in my life. I've made some, and I gave away a lot, but it was never happiness that the money brought. The money didn't bring happiness. If I wasn't happy with myself, I wasn't going to be happy. I think Kendi is laying out in part also a story about how to be happy. Right? How in the midst of, hey, there we go, I'm gonna call it right away. How in the midst of life's pressures and misunderstandings that, oh, this is gonna be tricky, brother. Sorry, y'all. I'm old and I'm gray haired and I can't do 3 things at once.
Well, while you do it, let me take up something that you were just talking about.
Yeah, go ahead.
This idea of story. Yes, what I appreciated very much about his introduction was his vulnerability and his willingness to share the truth of his journey. I think many of us will recall that he was talking about a speech that he was encouraged to give. He had just won a competition in high school, and he thought that this was a moment for him to speak up as the right kind of black man, the appropriate kind of black man. And so he took the opportunity during that speech, upon winning this competition, that he was going to express his disappointment in the black community and his peers, because he felt that they did not or had not achieved the greatness that MLK had professed or achieved. And he blamed black people in his speech for their shortcomings, saying, this is Kendi, saying that he was proud to be a good example of his race, and speaking out against black folks who he saw as being lazy and out of touch. And of course, in his book, he presents that example to say, looking back on that story in hindsight, he believes that he was actually being racist as a black man and perpetuating quite false ideas. He says he realizes now that he was being racist, and that he now sees that part of his life as a core motivation for what is now his journey as a black man to being anti-racist. So I thought that was really a powerful story to begin the book with. And I thought that it was just a really nice personal touch point for sort of entering into what is otherwise a very emotional and very halting conversation. Reverend John, you want to?
Yeah, okay, thank you. I think maybe the service has settled down a little bit. That's good. We tried the telephone for whatever reason. We're having trouble there too. I think somebody doesn't want us talking about this.
But we're going to talk about it anyway. Take us there, brother.
We're gonna talk about it anyway. We're gonna talk about it anyway. Rod talks about this problem of definition and personal acceptance for the climate and environment that one sits in. I heard in some of your stories as well, in your introductions, that you're sort of taking some responsibility for where you came from, and talk, Rod, send me that information again because this is terrible. I'm clear as a bell to me.
Is it? Did you try the dial-in?
I look in the text, look in the chat. Yeah, I tried to dial in. I don't know.
Okay. All right. Check your email. I'll send it to you in your email as well.
Yeah, great. I think it. Yeah. Sorry about the confusion, people. We're gonna work through this.
Check your email.
836. That's what I tried, and I'll just try that phone number again.
Yep. Check your email, and while you do that, I'll continue.
Yeah, Rod, pick up at Kendi's thesis on page 9, if you can identify his thesis there.
Yep.
Where he says on page 9, the opposite of racist is not.
Yep.
Rod, did you send him the one-touch dial-in, or did you send him the one with the?
I sent all of that via the email. Okay. Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. So so his thesis is very well outlined, I think, strongly on page 9, where he says very forcefully that he's not a racist. He's not also anti-racist. He's saying there's no essentialist category of one or the other, because to say that would mean that it's a static category that cannot be changed. And so he offers instead the idea that what we should be thinking about is sort of the day-to-day, the acts that we engage in from moment to moment, from minute to minute, from day to day, because we're either being racist or being anti-racist in our behaviors. So there's no such thing as not racist. So he's making some very forceful claims there for sure. And he's making it clear that there is no middle ground. You're either being one or being the other, which I think is what is really so provocative about his book. But he's very careful not to assign essentialist or permanent categories. It's more fluid, and it's more contextual, situational. Reverend John, is that working so far?
Well, we'll find out here in just a moment.
Okay.
Keep talking.
Oh, am I doing all right? Okay, okay. So it's the idea, I think, very thoughtfully laid out that going back to his story in the introduction, he notes this kind of idea that there's this myth in the American narrative about suasion rhetoric, that uplift suasion rhetoric, which says that that everyone ought to be on their own, basically raising themselves up by their own bootstraps. And he does a really amazing job of sort of pushing back against that false narrative, and I think calling out the notion that almost every case in this country, if not all cases of upliftment, there was some kind of advancement, there was some kind of help, there was some kind of leg up. I mean, you can look at various legislations that have been passed in the decades before, veterans assistance, immigration assistance, and incentives that we've afforded to generations over the decades. All kinds of decisions that we've made as part of our American story to include people of certain and particular backgrounds. No one ever really pulled themselves up by their bootstraps on their own, is his point. And so he does a really good job, I think, of pushing back against that uplift suasion rhetoric. And he challenges himself as a Black man to also not use that rhetoric because it's destructive and it's quite false as part of the American story. So I thought his introduction was really thoughtfully laid out. And I'm glad that he used his own story as a Black man to enter into his thesis about either being racist or being anti-racist. Reverend Jonathan?
Yeah, so the phone call doesn't work, and we just have to be in prayer about
Okay.
internet connection. I know it's solid right at this moment, so let's just hope it continues in that vein. Yeah, so this is not the greatest way to give a first impression, so just hang in. I really appreciate your time. So this, without belaboring Kendi's background, right? Because we've all got a story to tell. I mean, none of us come as tabula rasa. We all come to this point in our lives where everything that happened to us, everything we've been through, everything we've learned, everything we've seen has been written on the tablet of our lives. And as a result, we are not who we once were, okay? And so it's easy to take offense with Kendi's title about not being anti-racist, but it's not meant to provoke, you know, sentiments that you must be a racist, because he's not trying to say that. But I'm reminded on page 17, in fact, he cites James Cone, and James Cone defined his life labor as ready for revolution. We all know James Cone, famous theologian, Union Theological Seminary in New York City, and remarkable man in all that he did and said. And he said the call of the Christian is always to be ready for revolution, right? And if we look at Jesus, that's what we see all the time: ready for revolution, ready for change, ready to call injustice, ready to model love, ready to preach fairness and justice, ready to do what it takes to make an unlevel field a bit more level. Notice I didn't say completely level it, because it doesn't work that way, right? But an attempt to make. So in our conversations, one with the other, if we're willing to have some repartee, if we're willing to go back and forth with each other and discuss and dialogue nuances or misunderstandings or characteristics, then we have an opportunity for growth. Let me relate a quick story. I still work every day. I'm a high school mathematics teacher. And my principal called me into his office at the beginning of the year. His daughter is a sophomore at Arizona State University over here. And his daughter came home from school one day with Black Lives Matter t-shirts and painting cardboard signs and stomping around the house, you know, frustrating him. She seemed to be mad and angry that there were so many things that she had never been taught. Now, her father's a decent guy. Her mother is a wonderful woman. They're both Canadian. So, you know, they had a different lifestyle growing up as kids. And so here they are in Arizona, And he was really challenged by the idea, especially this notion of defunding the police and those kinds of things. And so he asked me, he pulled me into the office, he shut the door and said, sit down. And we began to have a conversation because he did not understand what BLM, Black Lives Matter, means, what it means to people. And I took about 10 minutes. It would have been easy for me to say, forget it, man, I'm not talking to you about this. Go educate yourself. Go find a book and figure it out on your own. You're a smart guy. You can figure this thing out. And I took some time, not because he's my boss, but because a human deserves to have an intellectual conversation with another human being especially about an important subject, right? And this was clearly important to him because his daughter, he didn't understand where his daughter was coming from, what she was talking about, defund the police. He was terrified. Defund the police is, what is socialism's coming? Oh my God, the world's coming to an end. And so I had to make this make some sense for him. I had to look at it I had to get him to look at it from a different angle. I think if we're going to read Kendi the way Kendi needs us to read him, we've got to look at it from a different angle. We've got to take off the goggles that are convincing us either we are or are not racist, or that we're not racist. We have to take off all those goggles and prepare to hear what Kendi's trying to get across in terms of the social dynamics and structures of the society that we all engage in, right? We all engage in a concern about who we are and who people think we are, right? Who am I and who do people think I am? And is it the same thing? Du Bois calls that double consciousness, right? Du Bois, the early 20th century philosopher who wrote all kinds of important works, talked about this idea of a double consciousness, right? One that was aware of the space in which they operated and one that operated in a different space simultaneously, right? But maintaining connections one to the other. And so Du Bois challenged the ideas of his contemporaries about this idea of assimilation. Hey, we should be more like them so that we can be more acceptable to them, right? And how for Du Bois that didn't seem to make a lot of sense because it didn't change what chapter 3 talks about, power. And until we can change, I did that because I noticed it was freezing, right? until we can change some of the power structures and dynamics of social order, right? Social policing, if you will, of social dynamics, then we cannot begin to see each other in the way that we want to be seen in. I can't take off the veil of my double consciousness if people aren't willing to see me, right? So if I take off the collar and unbutton the shirt, do you see Reverend Jonathan? In many places they don't, but as soon as I put on the collar, then I get treated a whole different kind of way because, hey, that's a clergyman, right? And so there's a whole nother level of respect, that double consciousness. I am completely aware that people do that, right? I'm completely aware that sometimes people have to hear what I'm saying before they'll appreciate my heart. I wish they would just get to know my heart first and then deal with what I'm saying. Because sometimes what I say is a little hard to swallow for a lot of people, right? And I think, again, Kendi is presenting material that's really difficult for a lot of people to swallow. And it boils down to power. Kendi is challenging power structures in a way that make us question why they exist in that way. And when we're able to question why they exist in that way, then we begin to question whether we want to participate or not. And when we begin to challenge the structure and why we participate, then we can begin to affect the kinds of change we would like to see in our social environment. Kendi uses the term racial puberty. Okay. Well, this is quite the show, isn't it? Way to laugh at me, because I'm gonna laugh at myself. Don't feel like you can't laugh at me, because you can't. Oh God. You used to racial puberty, right? Racial puberty, right? This maturation process, right? We've all been through puberty. It's a very challenging time in everybody's life. You know, things are awkward. We're trying to figure things out. Nobody runs through puberty. It's like, oh, that was cool. No problem. I'll do that again. Nobody wants to do that again. Nobody wants to do it. And nobody wants to live through racial puberty either, right? Right? Nobody wants to go through the challenges of meeting arguments and disagreements based upon race or race baiting after they've been through them once, or because they got to go to a family dinner, or because they met some strangers, or because somebody was at the other dinner table at a restaurant talking crazy stuff, right? And because every fiber in our body says, well, I can't sit here any longer and listen to that foolishness. I got to say something. And sometimes you say something, whether it's a cough, or maybe you go to the restroom and walking by, you kick somebody in the leg accidentally on purpose. Maybe you spill some water over the back of the table. I don't know what you do. I mean, people have done strange things, right? To get the attention of somebody, try to get to lose focus on the kinds of nonsense that they're talking about. But Kendi also goes on to say racist ideas become racist policies, right? Between on page 39, I think it's on page 40 actually. He says racist ideas become racist policies. Somewhere between 39 and 41. I think it's 40. And what he means is that without us even realizing the environment that we live in and how easily we just accept that environment, do we necessarily challenge whether it's just or righteous? Okay, the legal side says we're good. Okay, everything's fine because legally it's all good. The Constitution says, the law says, the justices say, everything's in writing. You know, in Arizona, we say Arizona revised statutes say. I'm sure you have the same kind of thing in California. California revised statutes say, and so that's what makes it legal. But as Christians, just because it's legal doesn't mean it's right, does it? Just because someone says this is the law, as Christians, do we just swallow whole and say okay, or do we expect of ourselves to at least intellectually challenge the laws that are in place? Do we at least expect that we would give critical analysis to something that on its surface seems a little unjust? If we're willing to give that kind of critical analysis, then we're willing to challenge the status quo, right? We're beginning to live through that kind of racial puberty, that anxiety about, well, what if? Right? Well, what if? Well, what if my feet don't grow as I get bigger? What if I don't grow facial hair? Puberty, right? What if the girls don't like me? What if I'm not a good basketball player? What if, I'm sure women say the same thing on the other side. What if I'm not pretty enough? What if my hair isn't long enough? What if? Well, what if? What if? So there is this puberty process that our nation is reliving to a certain extent. It's like we've been through this a few times, and we must enjoy puberty because we keep going through reliving this kind of nonsense. But nobody really enjoys this. But yet we must face it because it's inevitable, right? Puberty was inevitable in each of us. This kind of racial puberty, racial understanding of who we are and who they are, and why are we talking about us and them? Can we just get, I'm not gonna say, can we just be friends? But I'm saying, can we move to a place where we can have a conversation about the realities of racial injustice? Or at least can we talk about the news that we see on TV without pointing a finger at, well, if he had just done this or if she had just done that, he or she would still be alive. The police would not have had to do that if this had happened. I mean, we can go back to Rodney King. You know, if he had just laid still, he wouldn't have got beat half to death. Well, he probably would have got beat half to death anyway if he had laid still. Looked like he was pretty still to me, but apparently if you break the film down frame by frame, he was twitching or something. And so the twitch was a threat. So that's why he got hit again. I don't want to get hit again every time I go say hello to a police officer, every time I get stopped for a moving violation, whether I'm guilty or not, every time by accident my tags expire or my insurance lapse. Those things used to happen all the time. When I was young, I couldn't pay my bills. So every night I have to get around the insurance or get around the tags or something, but I usually caught up. I always caught up eventually. But by God's grace, I didn't have to run into a legal problem. But what if I had? But what if I had? Would justice be the same for me as it is with everybody else? In the news today, we can look upon it and we wonder. We wonder if it would have been. If it would have been. And that kind of the end of chapter 3. And chapter 4 talks about biology. And I don't really have much to say about biology. You know, race is a made-up kind of idea in order to draw a distinction between the colors of people's skins. And it was done in a way to allow for a justification for committing atrocities, primarily slavery. And those same definitions continue to permeate our social climate and communications one with another. At some point, my brothers and sisters, I really hope that we can get past race. I don't think we're living anywhere near a post-racial society. I hope none of us are that naive given our present climate. But I think that there are good people who can take hold of the conversation if we're willing to have the conversation. And cause that kind of change, beginning in our own families with our children, our grandchildren, our nieces and nephews, beginning in our social circles with our neighbors and our friends, our churchmen, churchwomen, and that conversation expanding to the young people who are around us and in our lives, those 20 and 30-year-olds who are beginning to build their families, into communities. So that everybody has an opportunity, whether it's to rent a home or to buy a home or to work a job or advancement on their job. That those folks who have the wherewithal to do whatever they want have the opportunity to do whatever they want. That's the kind of society I would like to see. Not one based on race and economics, but one based on economics, I guess, to a certain extent, but not economics like I'm going to put my foot on your neck until you die because that's the only way I can get a step up. But a kind of economic.
Reverend John, yeah, thank you. I want to stop you there because I actually think.
I'm sorry about the time, folks.
No. I got a question. I got a question from someone that I think dovetails with what you just said. Someone just asked a question on the chat about whether or not you could say a little bit more about that dueling white consciousness. You mentioned that.
Okay, I can talk more about Du Bois's idea of double consciousness, certainly.
Talk about that a little bit.
I will talk and talk, y'all. So listen, don't be shy about unmuting and saying, hey, wait, can I ask you a question? Okay. I am. Okay. Okay. I am not that formal. Okay. I am not that formal. I promise you. I mean, as informal as I know Reverend Rod can be sometimes, I can be more so. And he and I have talked across many a couch in front of the news or not, or walking in the backyard or sitting under a shade tree and just talk. And so that's what I was hoping we would just talk. Double consciousness. Double consciousness is this idea that I am aware of who I am and I am aware of who I am not. But society needs me to be both. Okay? And Du Bois is primarily talking about African Americans in his words, in his using of the idea of double consciousness. Like, okay, I have to be aware that I'm a black-skinned man in the dirty South at the turn of the century, or I could be dead, right? And so while my mind is alive and well, and I'm thinking about how to make my family's life and my life better, my church better, the people I interact with better, while my mind is running this wheel constantly, my body is aware that I'm walking on the sidewalk and there's somebody coming toward me, and the social norms say I need to step aside and tip my hat or turn my eyes away or just get to the other side of the street. So I have to be aware of, Du Bois argued that you had to be aware of both worlds, right? The world of your own personal sanity and the world of your ability to live to the next day, right? Because everything can't be solved in one single day. And so Du Bois's idea was that you have to be so aware of yourself and your environment simultaneously that you can begin to, I think the modern word is code switch, that you can code switch back and forth in the blink of an eye to fit into any kind of circumstance or environment that's going to allow you to survive that given moment. Does that get at the question that was being asked?
Yes, it does. And I think this is a great way for us to continue our conversation. If anyone has a question or a thought related to what you've heard so far, or something in the book that you'd like to go a little deeper on, I invite you to do that now at this time.
This is Eve, and I just want to say that sounds exhausting. Completely and totally beyond me exhausting.
Yeah, Eve, thank you.
Thank you, Eve.
And because we do it every day, it's not so exhausting to us, right? It's doing 20 push-ups. If you do 20 push-ups every day, you can do 20 push-ups every day. But
I'm thinking,
yes,
I'm thinking that you learned how to do that, and then you do it and you don't notice it. But I think I think really concretely, the section of your brain that's having to do both of those things at the same time, if it didn't have to, just imagine what you could think and what your life would be.
I would agree wholeheartedly. There would be much more room to be creative.
Right.
To perhaps focus on solving some of these problems that we face on any given day. Unfortunately, and you pointed it out, my God, what a burden that is. Okay, honestly, it is. It's quite a burden, but heck, I can't dwell on it. You know, we can't dwell on it, right? I mean, my ancestors were slaves. Okay, fine, but I can't dwell on that. You know, I've been turned away from jobs because I was a black man instead of a black woman. I know that, but I can't dwell on that. When I first moved to Arizona, I couldn't find a job for 6 months. Here I was a college graduate with tremendous experience, and I couldn't find a job for 6 months. Ended up working at, I don't know if y'all know Circle K. It's like 7-Eleven. It's like, ended up working at a graveyard shift in a Circle K for minimum wage, right? 'Cause I had to pay my bills. I mean, I had to do something. I mean, unemployment had run out. But why should I have to? Why? That double consciousness wears you out. I'm lucky I still look good as a 60-some-year-old man. It's okay to laugh. Yeah, and listen, and honestly, we have to laugh about it also, okay? Because if we take it way too seriously, then I have good friends who are psychologists, and I really care not to pay them. I'd rather they be my good friends rather than, you know, I have to pay them to be able to fix me. So there is that part also, that we have to be able to laugh about it. People who suffer from this problem, if we're going to maintain our civility and our sanity, recognizing we have to, we got to laugh about it. It's crazy, but you know, hey, it is what it is, right? We meet the challenge every single day. But thank you for your question.
Really good question. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have time, folks. Anyone else? We have time.
Well, I'd like to build on that for a minute. So much about the book resonates with me from a gender inequality perspective as a woman. And I know that's a different discussion, but even what you're talking about with double consciousness, when you're talking about the things that as a man of color, as a Black man, that you face in terms of fears that, for instance, a white man doesn't have to deal with. There are things that women have to deal with from birth that white men don't have to deal with. There's a double consciousness for any who's ever been in a leadership position or certainly in a corporate or a business position. There's definitely double consciousness there that is exhausting. And there's so much of it that resonates with me that I say on a very personal level, certainly not saying it's exactly the same, but there's a common experience for me that I'm reading and hearing in what's written in this book.
I would agree completely. And I think he tries to make that point also that, look, yes, women have this double consciousness problem as well. It's not isolated to African Americans, certainly. I agree with you completely. And women do suffer from it or have to live with it. And imagine your potential if you didn't have to deal with it, if sexism didn't exist. But let's just consider the idea that if somebody is racist, they're likely sexist. Would you agree? If somebody is a racist, they're likely a sexist also. If they're a sexist, they're likely to be a racist. It goes both ways, right? And so my wife uses the term schisms, right? Schisms, right? In other words, there are these cleavages between the isms that really lead to the same problem. If you cut down to the bottom of the valley, it's really the same problem.
Yes.
And my opinion is that problem is birthed out of this notion of having to be in control, power, right? And Kendi talks about it in chapter 3, power, right? And so how do we take this authority that we have, as human beings, not necessarily as Christians, but as human beings, how do we take thou authority and walk as though we know the ground upon which we stand and the direction in which we head? It's what Jesus did. I mean, right? That's certainly what Jesus did. He knew who he was. He knew the ground upon which he stood, and he walked that ground knowing, without preaching a sermon here, knowing death was on the way, right? But he still walked the ground. He was willing to die for what he knew to be correct. I'm not saying we all have to go out and be willing to die for what we know to be correct, but we certainly must challenge where we can, with folks we can have a civil conversation with. We must challenge the status quo ideas and get people to consider that they might be wrong. Because if we can get them to consider they might be wrong, then we can pry that door open another time. But if we got to let a little light in so that we can begin to see inside the dark room and allow them to come out from the darkness and into the light. Does that help? I hope that helps.
Resonates with me, and the fact that it takes just a tremendous amount of courage to walk that path, and the more courage you have, probably the more courage you're going to need on that path. So
interesting. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, good.
Let's keep
Reverend,
going.
Reverend, this is Maya. I was thinking about what you're saying on, kind of this double consciousness. And then I think part of the book is really trying to then take it up a notch to kind of the implications societally, so this idea of assimilation and segregation as these two, I guess, prongs. And it made me think a lot about the segregation part, I understood more beforehand, but I hadn't thought about the assimilation pressures and what happens from a policy perspective in terms of the idea of assimilation. I used to work for Fair Housing Council in Orange County, and we used to have, the board members used to have arguments about this issue of, assimilation or not, whether there was, public policy that we could kind of support in terms of assimilation. And I can see from this book some of the real dangers. He talks about, I think, Clinton, and some of the other policies that have really tried to create a dynamic where Blacks are forced into a pocket, or are expected to be a certain way, and then policy that reinforces that. So I don't know if you want to talk about that, but I thought he did a good job of talking a little bit about the policy level and how that impacts.
Yeah, and I think he breaches that subject in his dialogue about power, right? And who has the power. There are any number of examples where we can find in recent history, let's say in our lifetimes, right? Where decisions were made for whatever reasons or rationales that had an effect that could not have been calculated at the time the decision was made to do whatever it was that was done. Okay. And I think probably the most obvious case that can be made was the redlining of communities and the fair housing and mortgage banking rules and regulations around this redlining process that existed throughout the United States, both in rural and urban environments, that really devastated the potential of the American dream for many people. If buying a home is the American dream because that is where your wealth lies, then how is it that you can generate generational wealth from a community that's been designated as worthless, even though you've paid your mortgage for 30 years? And that's what redlining has done for many communities across the nation. International highway system, same thing. I mean, I love our freeway system, but every time I get on one and go through an urban environment, I look around and I say, oh, okay. I know why the freeway went through this area of the city and not through that area of the city.
Yep.
And the remnants of those decisions are still prevalent, still obvious well, I'm not gonna say obvious, but they still exist before our eyes. And that still boils down to power, doesn't it?
Yeah, and you're making me think too about, the fact that Orange County only has 2% Black households compared to all the surrounding other counties. And we were the home of the John Birch Society and considerable fair housing breaches. And it just makes me wonder, there isn't proof of this, but it certainly makes me wonder the impact translating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say those of you who are doing that work, keep doing it. It's great work to do. Try not to be discouraged and understand that equality, justice, and fairness are not, they're evolutionary, right? It's not going to happen overnight. It may not happen in this generation, but that doesn't mean the battle should not be fought, right? It doesn't mean the battle should not be fought.
Feel free, folks. We have time.
I guess I'll say, it's Michelle here.
Yeah.
Reading these first 4 chapters, there were 2 things or 3 things that came to mind. First off, I was constantly moving back and forward to, how do you personalize this to your own experience, the people that you encounter, the interpersonal level, and then the larger systemic societal area. And going back and forth and looking forward to reading the rest of the book, because I recognize he's speaking, I think, maybe from both levels and trying to target the societal systemic issues. But I recognize the challenge of that, because as Carrie was mentioning, I think we all do the same thing. You hear these stories and you try to translate it to your own experiences and say, that's happened to me, or something like that has happened to me, or something like that's never happened to me. And we have so many different groups in our country that I think everyone is doing that. And to come up with societal fixes that evens the playing field is extremely complex. And it'll be interesting to see how we can evolve to overcome some of that. I'm anxious to read the rest of the book.
Yeah, I'm not sure that we need to. I'm not sure that we need to fix anything, as we do need to evolve into something different, right? And so I believe that the evolutionary process is not about fixing the past, but about leaving the past in the past and being willing to walk on unsure ground, right? Upon new earth, and to create something new and different, hopefully more transparent, right? But leaving the past behind, not being ignorant to the past, and not suggesting that a veil has been drawn across the past that which no information will ever pass through. So we're not obliged or obligated to be concerned about, past injustices. We are, but to the extent that we can decide today as a community that this is not going to be who we are anymore, and to take that firm stand as a community and say, well, if someone were to bring nonsense in, we're going to cut it off at the knees. We're going to demand respect, and we're going to anticipate that the community we've established and the norms and expectations that we have agreed to and believe in and cherish are going to be the font of a new world, if you will. I hope, yeah. I've been accused of being too philosophical before, so I'm trying to be a little careful. How am I doing, Rod?
I think good. Okay. Yeah, but don't believe me. I think I'm always happy with. Let me, if I may. One thing that sticks out in my mind, at least reading these first few chapters, is this notion that he's not necessarily interested in winning hearts and minds, because winning hearts and minds is an exercise that can be very exhausting and time draining and frankly unproductive. He's interested in policies. He's absolutely interested in systems. He is absolutely interested in laws and how things get done. And to everyone's point who's touched on this, that is the hardest part of the work. And that's the part that he's talking about most clearly. Do you agree, Reverend John? I mean, you and I have talked for years about winning hearts and minds, and where has that gotten us? What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, we haven't given up the fight, right? We haven't
given up, but
so the struggle continues, right?
Right.
And I think that's the touchstone for us all, is that, don't give up the fight. The struggle continues, and you may not see the conclusion of it, but that doesn't mean it's not worth the fight.
Right.
I think he's pretty clear. All right. When we take a look at chapter 3 and chapter 4, when he's talking about power and biology, about what he has said in those two chapters and the way he has said it. And then when you look at the titles of the next 6 chapters,
yeah,
they all sort of begin to set a special kind of tone and tenor that will prick our attention and challenge our belief systems. Well, maybe not our belief systems, but the way we have thought. It will force us to think more critically about the ground upon which we stand, and perhaps we'll consider changing the ground on which we stand. Maybe we will find where we're standing to be quicksand, and we'll want to go stand on a rock instead. Maybe we're standing on a rock and we decide to climb a tree. Maybe we're climbing the tree and we've decided that the grass is greener on the other side of the pasture, so we're going to go to the other side of the pasture. I think the book can meet everybody where they're at in these next 5 chapters in a different kind of way. I think the ground will rise to meet your next step if you're willing to make that next step. And that's my thoughts on it. Just cursory overview of the next 5 chapters. I think we're in for a great learning opportunity. I say we collectively.
Yeah, I was thinking about the biology chapter because I think for many of us, are the generation before us and maybe a generation before that, we were taught certain things or we heard things. And I think he just lays it out so well in terms of like history and facts and, you know, the construct of race, which I don't think we were taught. And I think our 20-year-olds, I see, you know, Annie's kids, my kids, they've been taught that race is a construct. And as he says, race is a mirage, you know, and I think that alone is just, I thought, really well done and just will, you know, just shakes out all the preconceptions that your history brings you. And, you know, I remember stuff, you know, I remember something my dad said. I remember something my grandmother said that, you know, wasn't necessarily a central thought, but just completely, you know, wrong. But, you know, it just bleeds. It bleeds into your life. And I think he does a really good job of just kind of going, hey, here's what the history is.
Does anyone want to offer a question or a thought that you've been meaning to offer, but you haven't done yet? Go ahead, Phil. I see you.
The chapter on biology, my immediate reaction to that was, aren't we as a society beyond that aspect of racism? I mean, clearly biology was used to rationalize slavery. Biology was used in defending segregation. But in reacting to the author's attention that he paid to the biology issue, part of my reaction was, aren't we beyond that as a society? But maybe that's not accurate if you look at the broader sweep of society. Maybe that's the case with my friends and the people I associate with, but there are certainly there's certainly evidence, you know, in society of rabid racism that probably does continue to have a biological dimension. So that was my reaction to the discussion of biology. Not to minimize in any way that there are issues that are raised in the book that are serious issues, but I just don't see them as being founded from the perspective of biological differences, perceived biological differences between the races.
Yeah, I would say that I sure wish I sure wish I could agree with you 100%. And there was a time probably 15 or 20 years ago where I would say, yeah, I believe what you're saying is true in many parts of the country. But over these last I'm going to say over these last, I'm just going to say, I'm not really trying to coincide this with President Trump's ascendance to the presidency, but let's just say over the past 3 years, we have seen that that race has played a factor in the way, air quotes, justice has been meted out. Right? In fact, even today,
No.
people are challenging Senator Harris because of the work she did in the San Francisco area around criminal justice, or actually around sentencing, unfair sentencing, and failing to recognize that while she may have been the one who pronounced the sentence and rapped the gavel, that her hands had been tied by a legislature who deemed it necessary to pass laws dictating what sentences should be based upon particular crimes. So our criminal justice system is not fair. Our social justice system is not as fair as it could be. Foundations of our society are built upon injustices. And then there's this conversation about the Electoral College that are rushing back again. Everybody's scared to death of the Electoral College all over again, and this seems to be, the conversation every 6, 8, 10 years. That, oh, the Electoral College is bad. It thought it was one man, one vote. Well, one person's vote is one, but I think you understand what I'm doing here. I'm taking more of a broader historical approach to this idea that have we established a fair, open, civil, flat boundary, even hilled place where people can feel free to express themselves? And I would suggest that we haven't yet got there based upon what I'm seeing today.
I'll just say I agree with you, and I failed to communicate my comments about biology if I led you to believe otherwise.
Oh, no, I well, that's fine. I mean, I'm good with the ground you're standing on. I think you're on the same side as I am.
And maybe it's a nit, but in that chapter on biology, there are scientific differences across the population that makes some of us more susceptible to certain diseases, sickle cell, for example. And those have no relevance to social equality, but in making the case for equality, making the case for social justice, it just struck me as unnecessary and something of an overreach to place as much emphasis as he did in that chapter on perceptions of biological difference. It's not a big point. I don't think that it deserves any more conversation.
Yeah, I think he does make a big point, and no, I don't think he needs to hit the hammer that hard. But there again, I think it's back to, well, why did he pick this for a title? I think it's still early in his work where we run into that conversation. And I think we run into that conversation early because in part, he wants to be sure you stick with the book to get to the point of being able to understand his point.
I buy that.
Yeah, you're right. He's hitting that drum really hard and he probably doesn't need to. But bang the drum, he felt he must, right? So he said, bang the drum loudly then, right? Isn't that a book, Bang the Drum, movie, Bang the Drum Loudly, is it?
I think so. Yeah, I see Sharon nodding. Yeah, Sharon's backing me up. I think it is.
Thank you, Sharon. Appreciate that.
It is a few minutes past 8, and y'all know I love to end on time. So let me ask, is there anything that you absolutely want to ask this powerful man, just a great friend of mine, before we close this meeting up? Anything that you want to ask or say before we move to close tonight?
Yes, please come back.
Yeah. And thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I very much appreciate your perspective here.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And he absolutely, and he will be interested, and he will be invited to future gatherings. So as he's able, he'll be able to join. And we are just beginning, as he said. You know, this was meant to whet the palate. This was meant to get you to want to read the rest of the book. And hopefully we all want to read the rest of the book. I know I do. And hopefully you do as well. That's the point of those first few chapters, I believe. And Kendi does a good job of getting all of our antennas up. I am grateful. Oh, go ahead, Janet. Go ahead.
I really appreciated the sentence you said where human beings, we all deserve the intellectual conversations. That just really spoke to me. And that we have to be able to listen to one another. I'm not open when it comes to talking to certain political people, but other than that, that just really struck my heart. So.
Thank you, Janet. And we look forward to having you for future conversations as well.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I want to thank Reverend Jonathan for being a part of our gathering tonight. I want to thank all of you for joining in as well. This video will be available for you later to watch on a replay, so feel free to do as you are able. You'll be able to find it on the YouTube channel. And as a reminder, we will have our next gathering on September the 23rd at 6:30 p.m., during which we'll look at chapters 5 through 9. Again, that's September 23rd, chapters 5 through 9. So very grateful for all of you. Thank you. May God bless your evenings with peace, grace, and comfort. And I'll see you in 2 weeks for our next conversation. God bless you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. God bless you all.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Night.